everyone, and welcome back to the Tree Actions podcast. We have a couple changes today. We have a special guest host, Mr. DJ Newstater. Dwayne himself was unable to make it. He seems to be stuck in a government office trying to redo a passport. The strange things that happen to you in life. But anyway, and then we also have a really good friend of mine and excited to have her on the podcast here, Amanda Carpenter, who has a long experience in tree care industry, among many other things, and a lot of great insight. So, like I said, we always tell people, we were talking about this earlier off air, we always tell people that we don't have a script, and then we ask the same question to begin with every time. So maybe we do have a script and we're just misleading people. We call this the Human Forestry Podcast, which was an idea that, well, Dwayne named it, but I think we came up with it concurrently. And that what we came to realize is that in our own lives as arborists, there were very many similarities between trees, forests, and we started to understand that our communities, our groups looked a lot like forests, and I guess the analogies and stuff that could go on from there were very prevalent. So what we always start to ask people about is, when it comes to human forestry, how did you get involved in tree care? What's your background story? And we'll go from there. Sound good, Amanda?
Sounds great.
Thanks for the intro, Tony. Appreciate it.
No problem. People get to know you as you go on.
Dwayne has a tendency to get stuck in lineups.
Well, there's a whole nother story there. We'll get into later.
Interesting. This question has come up before, and I always think like, which answer do I give? So there's the answer of, I was kind of born into it. My father was actually a logger in the Adirondack Mountains back in the 80s. And so I grew up with a chainsaw running in the backyard all the time and visiting the header. And it's like a different type of logging than what we think of for tree care today, now that there's so much equipment. So I learned to nap very well with a chainsaw running in the background, as long as it was humming along nicely. If it stopped abruptly, there was always a bit of fear there, because there were several accidents. And I would say that tree care came back around. It was around 2005, 2006. At that point in time, I was a physical therapist and would have conversations with my brother about the physical body and climbing and trees. And so it was back in, we think it was 2006. It was whatever year TCIA was in Hartford, Connecticut. Ed and I presented together on ergonomics and the body climbing. It was very well received. And that was kind of the turning point of me getting involved in the industry and meeting many of you back in 2006, 2007, back then. So yeah, it's been an awesome journey.
Cool. Wow. And your father was a logger. So yeah, you definitely kind of grew up around trees and with trees in the family.
Mm-hmm. Totally. The smell of, like, I remember he'd come home at night and the bathroom would smell of like pine chips. Like, we're in the Adirondacks, so the northern white pine. Like, the smell of the wood chips, like, is a memory that brings back so much about childhood.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that can relate to that. I myself remember, I must have been 10 or 11 years old. I tried making my own cologne out of some sawdust. And I basically just mixed it in a little water spray can, and then I went around like spraying it on myself, and I was like, yeah, I smell like wood chips now, just like Dad. But no, I think a lot of people can relate to the smell of someone who works with trees. It's interesting. And so, did you live out? Where did you grow up? Like, were you out like with him in the woods when he would cut trees ever, or did you grow up in town? Like, what was that like?
Well, our town is a very small town in the Southern Adirondacks. It's called Warrensburg, is where I grew up, but most people would know Lake George. So we're just 4 miles north of Lake George, which is in the very Southern Adirondack Mountains. And so we lived in town, but very, very small, 3,000 people in our hometown. And so the logging company, Carpenter Brothers Logging, was owned by my uncle. And they had an old school bus that was parked at the header, and they would drag it around from header to header. and it had a wood stove in it that they would feed, and it would heat it. So we would occasionally go see my dad to have like lunch on the header.
And sorry, for those of us that aren't a header, what is a header?
Well, a header is where they bring the logs, they skid the logs out, and cut them to size. There's probably much more fancy terms for it, but cut them to size to get loaded up to be taken off to sawmill or wherever they're going to go.
Log landing is what we call it down here.
A log landing. Yeah. Cool. Right on. And you'd ride in a school bus that had a wood stove built inside of it.
Well, we didn't ride. So the school bus was parked kind of like a, travel trailer. Yeah. And they would drag the school bus from header to header, because they'd be set up. Winter was a prime logging time. Right. So the header might be the same header for all winter long.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting. So, and what'd you think about all the trees getting cut down and processed, and like, what was your first impressions of that as a kid when you saw, lumber being produced and dad going to work what was some of your first impressions on that?
Well, it was a very large industry back then. We're talking like very early 80s. We're talking like 80, 81. Right. And so it was like the norm in the Southern Adirondacks. There were several companies that did that, and small operations. So it was like a way of life. It was a part of life. It was a way to make money. It was a way to, you would actually, based on where the log trucks were headed, you knew which sawmill they were going to, what they were going to produce. And so it was kind of just a normal way of life. I do recall, though, the front of the log trucks, like Western Star and what are they, like Freightliner, and like, I remember this is the time of Transformers, and I remember being really afraid of the front of the log trucks. Like, they were big, mean, like, so I remember like the logs were no big deal, but the trucks were like scary monsters.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Interesting. Yeah, and so you kind of grew up around trees getting cut down, and then you ended up giving a talk way later as you grew up, and giving a talk on ergonomics in Connecticut, around ergonomics using chainsaws, or what was that talk around in 2005?
That was it was around climbing, using chainsaws, using hand tools. It was just like the positioning of the body, and beginning to think about the body and how the body gets abused by industrial athletes. So that was a time where it was like, this industry is a rough industry, and the logging industry, the arboriculture industry, kind of they're similar industries, but I wouldn't call them all the exact same industry. But it was like you beat the hell out of your body. And then you have a very, limited career. By your mid-40s, it's over. And so starting to look at how we take care of the body, how we move the body, is originally what we were talking about. But over time, as I evolved as a physical therapist in the way that I looked at the body, how we actually take care of the body has evolved tremendously since that original talk. So that original talk was about on how the body moves. And now really, I'm headed out to Pacific Northwest next week to talk about what's your body trying to tell you.
Right.
It's now very different.
Did you ever notice anything like that, like with your father, for example, because he was a logger, right, working in the woods? Did you ever notice stuff like that as a kid?
Well, he was like this amazing, never went to the gym, but had like a crazy, amazing physique. And so I realized like he's exercising every day in the work that he's doing, And so I realized that he was an athlete, and he actually took relatively good care of his body, eating whole foods, didn't eat a lot of processed foods. He did smoke for several years, but aside from that, took pretty good care of his body. And so he had a decent career. However, when I was 6 years old, so we're talking 80, it would have been 84, he had a pretty serious life-threatening accident. And actually, Tony would be able to explain exactly what happened better than I would in tree care terms. But basically, he got hit by a widowmaker and crushed his skull. He had a brain injury, but I didn't realize he had a brain injury until years later. Knocked his teeth out. So he had to have all sorts of reconstructive surgery, and it was in the hospital. And so I never realized how that impacted me until years later, because he recovered from that. Like, it was such a serious, life-threatening. I never realized how close to death he came, like, at the time.
Right.
Afterwards, once I was more evolved as a physical therapist and really understood the body, I'm like, oh my goodness, like, that was really serious. And that was a brain injury. I didn't realize, like, nobody gets hit in the head without having a brain injury. Even a concussion is a brain injury. We change. We're different after that. So I have two sisters. There's 4 children in our family, and 2 sisters that are older than I am. And then there's myself and my brother. My 2 sisters were raised essentially by a different dad than my brother and I were raised. And I only discovered that about 10 years ago.
Interesting.
So until I got into tree care, I didn't really understand the impact that accident had. I would say if you asked my brother the same question, he started to think about it much sooner than I did.
So yeah, it's and at what point did you kind of realize that, you know, the physical side, like you as a physiotherapist, was going to connect back to the tree industry or trees in a way? When did you realize that was a connection that you knew you wanted to pursue, instead of just, you know, continuing on with physiotherapy or you know, specifically you focus a lot on the nature of arboriculture and forestry related workers, the industrial athlete, as you mentioned. When did you kind of realize you wanted to make that shift?
Well, really, as I got to meet more and more people in the industry is easy to fall in love with the industry based on the people, right? Like, you meet somebody the first time, it's a handshake. The next time it's a hug, and you see them once a year, maybe once every couple of years. So the industry is such a warm, welcoming, connected industry in a general sense. I'm sure there's some out there that aren't, but in a general sense. And so I really just meeting actually many of you guys made me more and more interested, and also recognize that, you know what, there's so many aspects to arboriculture and being an industrial athlete that actually set you up for better health, right, rather than the opposite. So I'm like, I want to change that narrative. So it was somewhere after, 2008 is when the Ergovation, the saddle, the climbing saddle by Buckingham came out. And that's a design that my brother and I worked on. And so it was still about the physical body and how the body moved, even in 2008. So somewhere along 2010, 2012, somewhere in there, I started to recognize how we take care of the body and all the benefits of working as an arborist. You're working outside under natural light, which is a key to mitochondrial activation. You're engaging in nature. So you're touching the tree that actually roots down into the ground. You're getting negative ions. It's actually balancing your own inner battery and energetic field, increasing your biofields to improve heart rate variability. So I started to recognize, as long as you put good food in, and don't put a lot of toxins in, it's actually a profession of longevity versus the opposite. And I want to change the narrative. So that was somewhere in 2012.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Often a question that gets asked too on this podcast is how the trees have affected you both, well, in one domain kind of personally, but also how they've affected you in your professional life. And I think it's so awesome how you've taken that physiotherapy, the human body, and connected that back with trees and in the profession. And they are harmonious for sure. I totally agree with that. I've experienced that as well. Definitely go hand in hand. Trees and staying healthy and work and getting to work out there too in nature with it all.
Yeah, Amanda, it's something I've realized too in looking at, as you get older, you have to take better care of yourself and all the different things. And I looked at what I did as a living as a climber, and I would even say, I've never been one to engage actively or regularly in meditation it just doesn't typically work for me. But I did notice when I stopped climbing on a regular basis, I found myself wanting to meditate more. And I was thinking about why. And I'm like, well, working in the tree was kind of a meditation. You brought up a great point. It's, in so many aspects, everything we do as an arborist is good for you. But then it begs the question, and I know we've talked about this a lot, but I'd like to hear your viewpoints on it. Why then is it such a hazardous industry? Why do so many people get hurt doing it?
Yeah, great point. So that transition and that shift happened somewhere in 2015, 16. Like, why do accidents happen? Was a question that I asked. And accidents happen because of mechanical failure sometimes, and that can even relate back to a human failure that was an inspection error, or even a human failure in the factory. But it can result back to the human failure. And why the human failure? Is it because they weren't trained, or was it because they couldn't access the training? And as we look deeper and deeper and we look back at the history, the training has gotten more and more robust, but it hasn't gotten safer. So I asked myself the question, like, okay, why can't they access that training? And the answer is, in order to access everything that's stored in our frontal lobe, all of our memories, we have to be in what's called a coherent state. And a coherent state is a grounded state, a non-triggered state of the nervous system. So if we get triggered, essentially what happens is our heart rate and our heart rhythm kind of take off. They elevate. And they then send information up to the brain that puts us on our reactionary brain rather than in the frontal lobe where all of the training is stored. So, there's an accident investigation. The person made a fatal mistake and they're dead. And a bunch of people looking at it. What the hell were they thinking? Well, the issue was they weren't thinking. So this is where Tony and I together kind of started to look at, well, why weren't they thinking? What was causing them to become incoherent? And things like they were, a new parent and have a baby at home and they didn't sleep well. They just got some terrible news in their family. Their blood sugar was off. But so often it related back to they had a boss who triggered them. And so many people in the industry are promoted based on being a good worker, not based on being a good leader. Right? And so we started to look at like what makes somebody a good leader. And particularly in this industry, a lot of people who are right now currently in leadership positions or owner operators were raised by the generation that was, pull up your bootstraps, just get shit done, go out there, non-emotional, and in a very triggering way. And then the newer, younger generations tend to be a little bit more aware of the fears, want to understand why. And so depending on who that leader, how triggered that leader is in the moment, is their battery depleted? Are they well hydrated? Did they sleep well? Will determine who they show up as. Do they show up as that positive, empowering younger generation leader? Or do they show up as the leader that is stuck in them generational, yelling and using fear, command and control to get things done? And so really, that's when Tony and I teamed up with the leadership program that we have, like, let's impact, because people don't want to be bad leaders.
No. And it's this is an interesting point too. It's something that I've experienced in the industry. There's always the good, bad, and the ugly, so to say. And there's lots of good, It's something that I wonder sometimes, maybe somebody who's experienced some of those negative interactions, when they go back out into the woods or into the forest in a non-industrial setting, how do they feel? Do they think about work when they see a tree, or do they think about something else? And I mean, when you see a tree, Amanda, what's like you see a beautiful, well, I shouldn't put any kind of context around it. Like when you run into a tree, what does it make you think of when you see a tree? What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Well, it depends on, so I'm actually thinking about like this past weekend, we did some hiking in we actually live in a forest-based community and there's pines everywhere. And actually we were in a section that needs to be lumbered. And I'm like, this area needs a little TLC. Like the trees are crowding each other out. Some of them need to be moved out of here. So I was actually thinking of how the forest could actually be enhanced by doing some very selective cutting in that area. Like there was too much happening. It was overpopulated. Interesting.
Yeah. So you're thinking very, I like, yeah. In that setting, a bigger picture perspective, like how can we actually make this better to provide more services, ecosystem services and social services for individuals? And yeah, interesting. Yeah. Tony, I'm curious with you, like what, like, does it depend on like for me, I'd say it definitely depends on the tree sometimes too, like what tree it is that I see. Like if it's a dead ash or elm, I might go towards more the industrial side and just think about a time when I was up in a dead tree and feeling a little scared or worried or whatever. But if it's a beautiful Salix babylonica on the edge of a pond somewhere, I start thinking of Lord of the Rings, or something like that. It's interesting the different settings and what they trigger in us as memories.
Yeah, what I think of when I see a tree is a complex question, right? I know if you'd asked me that 5 years ago, you'd have gotten probably a very technical definition or explanation, because I tended to see trees as jobs, as something to be completed, as something that needed fixed or helped or whatever removed. I think as I've gotten older and moved forward, and maybe it just comes from climbing them less as well. I don't have to climb trees every day.
Right.
I tend to see them more as well, there's certain trees that elicit memories because I've worked in them for years, again and again. So I go through the old stomping grounds and I've climbed that tree. Oh, I've pruned that tree. Oh,
Yeah.
And that triggers a memory on that time and space. I mean, all of when my nieces and nephews were born and my brothers would call me and make the announcement, I was usually at work. I remember those trees, so I have trees that are connected to, family events, which is weird, but true, because I can remember where I was at that moment. But I think now if you look at it the whole, I try and think of trees have taught me acceptance. I would used to look 10 years ago, I'd look at a tree and think how I could fix it. Now I look at a tree and think what it's trying to tell me.
Interesting.
And understanding that, a lot of my work, while not bad, was not necessarily for the tree. It was for the society, culture, environment, human environment it had to live in. Not the tree was fine. Like the dead wood I removed out of the oak tree didn't care. Not saying that removing the dead wood was useless, but it didn't affect the oak tree, and it was fine one way or the other. So I tend to see them more now. For instance, I see a dead tree laying in the ground, and when you think about it, pound for pound, it has more life in it than when that tree was alive and growing, because then it was just one thing, but now it's a host for so many other things. So trees are that's a complex question for me, what I think when I see a tree, but that's fine. I don't mind it so much. It's
yeah. I've learned complex questions. I know that.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from trees. A lot of things in acceptance, in understanding, in work ethic. Trees have taught me a great deal about work ethic and stuff. But then they've always been a bit of a medium. So I don't have a good answer. I'm going to sit firmly on the fence on that one.
Yeah, firmly. Yeah, or just don't hit the fence. Right. That's the key portion of that. Yeah, Amanda, I'm curious too with going back to trees, and we're talking here a little bit about people's experiences and negative interactions maybe in the industrial setting on the job site with a bad boss or something like that. But do you ever, trees have been scientifically proven, and nature is scientifically proven to have major health benefits, right? And there's people out there writing articles and studying how putting the science behind some of the energy, so to say, or the energy fields behind nature, and specifically trees though, and how they create chemical changes in our brains. What's your experience with that? And when was the first time that you really noticed that you had that experience with a tree, where it was more than just the knowledge side, like you felt some sort of or have you ever felt some sort of energetic connection, or it changed your mindset a little bit when you were around that tree or in that environment?
Yeah, well, I would say trees in general, because of growing up in the Southern Adirondacks, there's trees everywhere. Lots of pine trees, and pine trees are intimidating to me because they are so dangerous and they're so big and they fall a lot and they do a lot of damage around here. But the smell, it's usually on my desk, and I took it to the retreat that I hosted last weekend. It's actually a little essential oil of the Adirondack Park, like the trees in the Adirondacks. So you can smell it, and it's like you're hiking in the forest. I have one of Acadia National Park too. So like you can smell and just like, oh, everything that does. But the trees, so smell is actually a direct way to our brain, our memory of our feeling brain, but particularly phytoncides that come off of trees that actually are like natural endorphins.
Right.
So as I said, there's so many benefits of being out around trees and being in nature. Phytoncides are one. Phytoncides are what are released, and everybody talks about forest bathing, like, going in the forest, and essentially we would call it hiking, right?
Right.
Aren't around trees a lot, or they call it forest bathing, going into the forest and walking. When we're looking at that greenery, when we're looking at trees, we actually burn more calories with the exercise and the physical activity we're doing. There's so many benefits. They say as long as we're safe in nature, in the forest, we can't be angry. And I would say that is true as long as we're safe, right? Like rage and anger, if we had to defend ourselves against a grizzly or something in the woods, of course we'd be angry. But so yeah, there's so many physical benefits. And I used to say, years ago, when somebody would get promoted from like a climbing position to a sales position, say, and like, oh, now they're in the car all the time and they're driving around, or they're in the office all the time. And people would say, oh, their health is falling apart. And it's the physicality. They need the physicality back. And I called bullshit on that years ago, because I'm like, it's not the physicality. Like, they are not engaging in their meditative practice. Smelling the trees, touching the trees, the biofield, actually our heart rate variability is enhanced by being around trees. And heart rate variability is really our overall health. It's associated with all-cause mortality, and it's a better measure of health than cholesterol and other blood work goes. So when we are around trees, the biofield to improve our heart rate variability is improved, right?
Right.
And if we also think about, somebody is 100 feet up in a tree doing a removal, you have to be incredibly present. Like, it's putting us, or putting you guys, in the flow state, like an athlete. If we think of a really aggressive ski racer who is going down, don't hit the tree, don't hit the tree, don't hit the tree. You're not thinking of what not to do. You're just in that flow state, right? So that's the same state that I would argue that a climber gets in when they're in a risky position. It's that flow state, that presence. You have to kind of, wall out what else might be happening. And then when you're safe again, boom, reality hits. And when we do accident investigation, it's actually when people let their guard down from a safety standpoint that more accidents and injuries happen. So, and I wonder with the, is it Cena?
The communication headsets.
Yeah, I wonder those years, if we look at when Cena came out and then the years in the future, I wonder if that's going to interrupt that presence and that meditative and that flow state time with the trees. Because if somebody's listening to a podcast, even, they might not be talking to somebody, but they're listening to a podcast, they're not as present. So I wonder what we're going to see happen.
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious, Amanda, your perspective too on flow state. And I'm just thinking off the top of my brain here, but when it comes to safety in the industry, sometimes we see evidence of potentially overreactions or overregulation at times, and how that could affect a worker in a tree in their flow state, so to say. What's some of your thoughts on that? Like, do you think there can be a boss that's too bossy, or is it good to let climbers to some degree enter that flow state in a way that they know how energetically?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, yeah, so micromanaging totally can take somebody out of their flow state, right? It's like that coach. So if you think of an athlete and a coach coaching them, if the coach is yelling at them and in the moment when they're performing, when they're actually engaging, like yelling at them at that time wouldn't be helpful. You stupid asshole, don't do this differently, do that differently. It wouldn't be helpful. They're cheering, they're encouraging, right? Like if you think of fans even, we want to be encouraging when somebody has to be in a high performance. So we have to look at that same state. I mean, if we were to look at Olympic level ski racing, like one wrong move, you could die, right? Same thing with
Mm-hmm.
climbing. One wrong move, you could die. The state that the person is in and what is happening to them while they're in the state, to not get distracted out of that state. Because essentially in a flow state, an athlete doesn't hear the fans, doesn't hear the coach, like doesn't hear anything. They're present with themselves. We need to be aware that that's the same state that climbers need to get in when they're in very risky situations.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's information, and there's true science to this on the quantum level. There's information in the field through our heart rate variability that's communicated before it can actually like process through our brain. And so when it comes to reacting to a potential accident, if the industrial
If you're
athlete
not taking in those senses, if you're not
Exactly.
taking in everything, you're not going to be able to react in a suitable manner.
Totally,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. Awesome. Yeah, well, I find that topic fascinating. And I've definitely experienced that myself, the getting into a flow state, but also having that flow state interrupted by certain things. And I find it's always good to take a break when that happens. If your flow state, you're noticing it getting interrupted, that it's good to just come down, take a break, and regather your senses before you get back into it. Because definitely bad things start to happen when you ignore that energy field, or that spidey sense feeling, that tingly feeling.
Is there anything we could do as climbers, or any type, I guess, to enhance or get into the flow state, to move into it? Because for me, it's always been kind of a fleeting thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's certain activities that were more likely to put me in a flow state than others. Tree work was one of them for a long time. Ironically, the reason I've really stopped climbing production work on a daily basis was my inability to get into a flow state. In fact, I had the exact opposite. I was like anti-flow. It was Monday morning, but I was Friday afternoon. That was not a good way to go about doing tree work. But is there anything we could do to enhance that, Amanda, to help or to develop that capacity to do that?
Yeah, great question. And then we'll want to circle back on like when that flow state, like that's when a climber knows that truly their career is done. When that flow state, like that's the body saying, all right, check out. Because if you can't get in that, then an accident is going to happen. So, and we'll talk about that actually at PNWISA next week, about what's your body trying to tell you. So there's a lot of things that we can do to enhance that. First and foremost, super important, proper hydration is absolute key. And then in the moment, how we breathe. So there's a technique called a coherent breathing technique. So there's lots of breathing techniques out there. Some breathing techniques are to actually like clear energy. Like if I've got too much anger in my system and I need to bring myself down, I can do an aggressive breathing technique that clears that energy. There's relaxation breathing techniques that relax us. There's not a single industrial athlete who should ever be relaxed on the job, though. Flow state is coherence, where everything is working together cohesively. Relaxation is like that belongs at home. We can't even drive a car when we're in relaxation. So coherent breathing technique is right through the center of the chest. We just imagine our breath is flowing in and out of the center of our chest, breathing a little slower and a little deeper than usual. And that can actually changes the pressure on the heart to shift the rhythm and to put us in that coherent state. So there's a lot of different techniques out there. Heart Math Institute is something that we brought to the world of arboriculture back in 2017, 18, somewhere along in there. And so we would call that technique, it's called heart focus breathing, or in the moment tactical breathing. So what it does is it helps to get you in that flow state. We teach law enforcement and military, like when they've got gun drawn, focus your attention in the area of your heart and breathe to put you in the flow state. So it actually increases situational awareness rather than causing the tunnel vision that can happen.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it just makes me think. Do you think we do the same thing when we're relaxing too? Like we're talking about it in the sense of, we're working and we need to get into a flow state to produce and, production wise work on a tree. However, on the flip side, when you're just, on that hike or you're enjoying nature, do you think we do similar breathing techniques, or is it something kind of different?
Great question. I mean, in theory, we want to be in a coherent breathing technique all the time, because what coherent breathing technique does is it is a rhythm of sympathetic to parasympathetic. So our autonomic nervous system has two sides of it. And everybody talks about, oh, the fight or flight response, it's terrible, we never should be there. Well, that's a triggered state. The sympathetic nervous system is just the gas pedal of our nervous system, and we need it. We need it to think, we need it to act, we need it to react, we need it to drive a car, we need it to run a chainsaw. So the sympathetic nervous system is the gas, but if we run the gas too often, we run out of gas. So we need to actually be taking little breaks to recharge the system. So gas, brake, gas, brake. The rhythm of that gas, brake comes from our breathing. And actually that's what we call coherence. So when the in-breath, we're in a state of sympathetic, which is the gas pedal, energetic, that can be present. On the out-breath, it's a state of relaxation. So yes, when we're hiking, we can get into that same state. It might just not be as focused. The degree of focus and the degree of flow is a little bit different depending on where we're at. Can we let our guard down? So the whole idea of coherence is it increases situational awareness, right? And that's a big thing in safety. We want increased situational awareness in the safety world because we're going to pick up on something. We can be that present when we're hiking to be aware of, like, is there a danger of an animal up ahead?
It's interesting. I'm thinking back now to earlier in the talk, and you described a widowmaker that hit your dad. And why do you think that happened?
Do you know the story? Because that's an interesting question.
No.
And I don't even know, the way I tell the story is a little bit different than the way that my dad tells the story, which Tony now has. But the way I remember the story being told is my dad sensed that something was off that day. Like he sensed something just wasn't right. He felt it. But back then in the 80s, you didn't speak up. You didn't stop work. You didn't just say something doesn't feel right. You know, even nowadays, there's some teams that'll be like, no, we're calling it. Something just doesn't feel right. But then there's other ones that, what are you talking about? We don't know what it is. We're just going to keep going. So
he did. There was in the story, he had some sort of feeling that something was off.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's information on the quantum level. There's information, and the trees. So the HeartMath Institute is actually measuring. They have monitors on trees and the information trees put out. Like the trees can actually give us an indication of whether or not an earthquake's going to happen.
Right. Right.
So there's information in the field that we have access to, but we have to be present and coherent enough to recognize it, number one. But then we have to be brave enough to act on it, number two.
Yeah, it makes me think about a lot of stuff. That's interesting. Very interesting.
Well, I mean, you talked about, the role of leadership and bad leaders, and we imprint on that too. I think what a lot of people miss, and this is a conversation we've had many times, Amanda, is that when you say leadership and leadership development, a lot of people think of the classic leader, right? The person that stands in front of people and all that, the crew leader, the company owner, and those things. I think that what most people miss is that the leadership really, it has to start at an individual level, right? And what I've found that is when you're in that flow state, or you're coherent, however you want to describe it, you're more likely to be a better self-leader. So you're more likely to say, this isn't right. We need to stop. We need to reassess. Than to just go straight on in and just, and bullhead in it. And I remember talking with your dad about this story, and the way what he impressed upon me was, for him, it almost seemed superstitious. His concerns were almost like a superstition. Like he knew something was off, but it was like, he thought he could maybe combat it through superstition. I've done this. I'm wearing these boots, and these aren't his examples. These are just off the top of my head. But there was some clothing involved in there. I haven't listened to the recording in a bit. But
it was red Fruit of the Loom underwear.
All right. So, I
can relate to that. We all got our special socks and underwear.
You're right. But I think that he had seen that or felt that, for lack of better term, spidey sense, but then was relying maybe perhaps on some superstition or tradition or whatever you want to call it to help combat that, which we all do. It happens. I know as a climber, my gear had to be just right in the right way. And it didn't make any sense to anybody but me, but it was just the way I wanted it to be. And some of that was straight up superstition. Some of it was getting to the point of, I think the saving grace for me, and when I realized that I wasn't able to really get into that flow state when I was doing tree work, the saving grace for me was, how do you put it? I think that I had practiced working at a high level for so long, and then I trained other people to try and get to that high level, that I recognized the deficiencies in myself very early. And could literally, having the experiences that I've had seen so many people, doing the right thing, but still failing, still having incidents, still, getting killed, still getting hurt, that I could see the writing on the wall in my own work. And that was a gift that I gave myself. And I think your father, to an extent in his story, did too. He just was never in a position to step back. There was something holding him back, whether it be, just financial pressure, work ethic, whatever it be. There was that one thing that just didn't hold back. You know what I mean? Just didn't allow him to step up and say, nah, not today, or to look up. Because I don't think he remembers if he would have done a better hazard inspection. I don't know if he'd have seen that hazard. He doesn't have that level of recollection, but it's possible. It's possible that he would have looked up and been like, "Whoa, look at that!" Right? And but I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. Often with accidents, and stories around accidents, sometimes there is this recurring theme that comes up, which is something was just off that day. It always starts off with that. And for whatever reason, hindsight's 2020. You can look back on something and say, yeah, that makes sense why I was feeling the way that I was that morning, now that the whole day has progressed the way that it has. But yeah, it's interesting. Amanda, do you have any kind of experience around that relating to trees, like where you've sensed something was off? I know you like, have you, I'm actually not sure, like, have you worked much in the industry, like on the job site, cutting trees and running chainsaws?
No. So everybody in my family was allowed to run a chainsaw except for Amanda. So I don't
Right.
I don't know what I did. Like, we actually, our primary source of heat was wood. And so I don't know what I did, but I was kind of also known as the spaz and the freak of the family.
Right.
But I was like, you don't touch it. So I did touch it at one point in time. I don't, like, my dad tried to teach me. I don't know what I did wrong. I don't remember doing anything wrong per se, but like, no, just too spastic. So I was always the one like lugging and moving. I was allowed to use the wood splitter though. So yeah, no, I haven't. When the electric chainsaws came out, it had been like years compared to gas chainsaw and the electric. I'm like, oh my God, this feels so dangerous, because it doesn't feel dangerous. Like, this is freaky.
Right.
Like, just like electric ones. So no, to this day, I really don't have very much interaction. I have a very healthy respect. Like, I am truly aware of how dangerous they are. My dad was a professional lumberjack doing like the competition stuff years during that time as well. And like, we watched people chop their toes off because they were doing like the standing axe splitting, and there's no steel toe boots. Like, the injuries I saw happen as a kid, like, really changed. Even just like touching the saws, like there was a cross cut, like, don't touch that. So I have that very healthy fear within me. So I myself, and I don't really enjoy watching. Well, I don't enjoy watching job sites, because it just runs through my head what could happen. And the industry that I've worked in for 25 years now as a physical therapist does tell me, like, shit happens, and sometimes you never see it coming. And so I'm a much more paranoid person now.
Right.
Me paranoid than I was as a kid, seeing some of that stuff, because I've seen. But the one common theme, I would say, in 25 years working, and I've worked with a lot of injured workers. It happened to be one of my specialties.
Right.
There was always information. And sometimes the information was simply, I can't keep doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I can't keep doing this. Right. And as Tony had said, like, for my dad, it was a financial reason. And also, you just pushed through. Like, we had limiting beliefs of, I have to keep going. I have to provide for my family, even when things are off. And so I have, so many different stories from injured workers who I've spent, thousands of hours with at this point in time, saying that there was information ahead of time, or they were saying to themselves, I can't keep doing this, but I don't know what else I'm going to do. So we get to that point within any job when we're not enjoying it anymore, our body's trying to tell us something. Somebody who works in an office breathing recycled air under artificial lights all day can have the same thing. I can't keep doing this. I'm selling my soul. Like when we are not in alignment with our heart's desire and impacting the world the way that each and every one of us is uniquely designed to do, our body sometimes will take us out so that we get on our ass and we learn, and we're in that being state instead of the doing state, and say, what has to change?
Yeah. Well, Amanda, it's, I love talking about this stuff because there's so many different avenues you can go with it. But what would you say is one of the biggest lessons that trees have taught you?
It's the biggest. Well, this is going to be a little bit like deep and not necessarily anything that we have talked about, but just that like change is inevitable. Change is inevitable. And it's sometimes the shit that happens to us in life, the rough weather, if you will, actually makes us stronger, So there's so much that we can learn from the wisdom of trees in general, just by watching them. And they're like elders, when we're feeling very alone, when we're going through hard times in life, to recognize everything that they have been through, all the seasons that they have been through, all the storms that they have been through, and all the hundreds of years that they've lived. There's just such tremendous wisdom in that.
Absolutely. Couldn't put it better myself. I agree. Well, it's a lot to think about, a lot to process.
Well, DJ's tired of me because we just spent all last week
spent a week together
doing trainer. Which brings up an interesting concept. I'd never realized that having, you talked about the value of coherence when we're working. And while training doesn't work, the training I've seen work the best is when you conduct a class that gets the students as close to coherence as you can. I mean, ultimately, you have to move yourself into a state of coherence, right? It's like motivation. You can show someone the path, but you can't really motivate somebody, right? You can inspire them, but you can't motivate them. And having done trainer with Dwayne and DJ last week, I realized that so many of the tools that I've been using for these years, I learned over and over, are really the reason that they work is they start to generate that coherent field of learning, which is an interesting way to go about it. And it was an interesting perspective. I'm not entirely sure those types of ideas occur to me, and then I got to think about them for a while before I can talk about them. But it was an interesting observation I had in this last week. And I look forward to being able to train again and then do that, from the outside looking in as best I can, like rise up above myself and see what I'm doing, and then see how it plays out from that perspective. It should be interesting. But having said that, I don't want to. Oh, go ahead, DJ.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure getting to talk with you again, Amanda, and listening to your stories and learning a bit more about your dad too, which I'm sure I've heard some of those stories before, but it brings it to a new light for me for sure. So, and just to hear that put that way too, that he sensed that something was off a little bit that day. I think it really encapsulates the whole idea of trees affecting us both personally and professionally, and how we choose to go about navigating that in life navigating that feeling is up to us. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks, DJ. So good to see you again.